On today's show, we've got some 2025 NHL draft comparables. We're going to be going through the top-end prospects of this draft and giving them comparisons on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakesh, QMJHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down some NHL comparables for the 2025 NHL draft class. We're going to start with three big names in the first segment: James Hagens, Michael Misa, and Porter Martone. Then we're going to move on to some other prospects in this draft: Cameron Schmidt, Anton, Frondell, and Victor Eklund. And then finally, in our third segment, we'll look at our own regions and give them comparables. Sebastian's chosen Will Moore for his USHL comparable segment there. And I've chosen Caleb Desnoyers, and we both really like Nathan Quinn. So we're going to give him some love as well in the third segment there. But before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get up to $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode and what you want us to talk about next. If you have any questions overall about your favorite team's prospects or about some 2025 NHL draft eligibles, just ask them down below. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with the prospective number one overall pick in the 2025 NHL draft, James Hagens. Now he's got a really interesting style. It's this kind of speedy transition player, really good in transition at carrying pucks and creating plays. He's got goal scoring skill. He's got playmaking skill. So the comparable here with Jack Hughes is a pretty fitting one so far in this draft class, right?
It really is. And I mean, we want to temper expectations a little bit here because it's not fair to any draft eligible to say like, oh, you're going to be the next Jack Hughes. But in terms of how he approaches the game, and especially like how his strengths are leveraged in transition, is very reminiscent of Jack Hughes in his draft year. He's a really, really good skater, not quite at Jack Hughes's level, but really dynamic with the puck on his stick. Size-wise, also relatively comparable. Hagens is 5'10" and 176 pounds as a left shot centerman. And he broke all sorts of records last season. He broke the U18 World Championship scoring record for a single tournament with 9 goals and 22 points in just 7 games for Team USA, which didn't quite suffice to win out the gold medal game against Team Canada, partially due to a not so great penalty taken by Trevor Connolly. But he also played really, really well in the USHL, specifically for the NTDP. In 26 USHL games, he scored 18 goals and 47 points. This is a born point producer. And through his first 3 games with Boston College, he's already up to a goal and 4 points as well. This is a very dynamic player with the puck on his stick, who likes to attack defenses with speed. And he is also able to implement a lot of east-west motion in his rushes. This is not a pure north-south attacker. And he's really able to find gaps in defensive coverage, whether he has the puck on his stick or he's moving off of it. And he's a player that definitely is able to elevate the wingers he plays with, and he's going to be a joy to play with wherever he lands in the NHL come draft day.
Absolutely, yeah. He's a bunch of fun, and he's got a bunch of skill. He's going to be a very interesting player to keep tabs on as the year goes on. I like the comparable mainly because of that transition skill, right? Like you've got 2 guys who can just really dominate off the rush, who can carry pucks across the lanes and through the middle of the ice without really much effort. But I think Higgins, obviously, goal scoring skills there at a higher level already. The playmaking skill isn't there at all in terms of the same level as Jack Hughes is in his draft year, and the handling skill as well. I'd say that Hagens is a really good handler, really, really good, but Jack Hughes was just another level there, right? So there's some differences there, but I think that overall, in terms of their impact on the game and the way that they approach the offensive game, is really similar. James Hagens has some interesting two-way skills as well. I've found him to be a really energetic back checker, positionally sound, all that stuff. So he's interesting. Let's move on to Michael Misa. And Misa is a bit of a tough one. We've actually got a kind of hybrid comparable here for Michael Misa in terms of playing style. The first one that we came up with was Macklin Celebrini, but it felt like something was missing there. So I added Nico Hischier into the mix there in terms of a comparable. I think that if you blend the two, you get Michael Misa. Misa's a goal scoring center. He loves to shoot, and he does it liberally. But he also has the back-checking energy, the two-way acumen, the defensive responsibility of a center. He's got a bunch of center habits, really. I'd be really, really surprised if Misa doesn't develop as a center at the NHL level, even though he has played a lot of wing in Saginaw. But, right now he's driving the bus in Saginaw on a team that doesn't really need anyone particular to drive the bus. Like, this is a stacked team, and Misa's making the most out of it. Again, the goal scoring skill has really flashed this year. The handling skills hit a new level this year, it seems. Yeah. We had a lot of concerns last year with Misa kind of looking a bit more like Shane Wright as an exceptional status forward who didn't really stand out offensively as much and really kind of just laid back and made defensive plays and just kind of thought the game more than actually kind of chasing it. But now he's taking the game to him. He's taking shifts but in full control. He's getting off the wall. He's getting shots in motion. Really, really, really dangerous player. And for me, so far, he's outshone Porter Martone, even though Martone has, he have 20 points in 9 games now, 20 points in 10 games. I still think Misa's been the best of the two. And just to go back to the comparable, what do you see in Hischier's game that you see in Misa's here?
It's the two-way refinement, really, with Michael Misa. Like, the very clear thing with him this season is that, this is his 3rd OHL year, despite just being a draft eligible now, and that experience just shines through how he approaches the game. Like, yes, there is dynamic game-breaking skill that we see on most shifts where he's on the ice, but it's the intelligence off puck, the defensive zone habits, the back-checking. Like, he's so intense as a player, too. Like, he puts it all on the line. To just tilt the ice in his team's favor, just as we saw with Nico Hischier in his draft year. And it's also a similar thing with Celebrini too. Like, last year, we were always just like thinking, this is a 23-year-old player playing in the NCAA, not the youngest player in the entire league of college hockey who isn't even 18 years old yet. And similar thing with Misa this year. He looks like one of the more refined players in the entire OHL. And through 10 games with Saginaw, he has 14 goals and 21 points. So he is producing at a very high level, but also shining in all 3 zones. And he isn't sacrificing defense in order to create that offense, which, we are very appreciative of as well as from a scouting perspective.
For sure. Yeah, I think that there's a decent, he's hitting the right spot in terms of, blending that defensive acumen, that responsibility with that goal scoring skill, for sure. But let's close things off here with Porter Martone. And for me, this is probably the easiest comp of the 3. For Porter Martone, my comparable is a better skating Corey Perry. And we've heard this before, and it's spot on. He's an absolute pest. He's a menace to play against. He's a thorn in every defender's sides. Post-whistle shenanigans, fights, you name it. He does it all, and he takes pleasure in it. You can see how much he enjoys being annoying. But on top of that, he has a tremendous shot. He has great playmaking skill. The handling skill is excellent as well. And I think the issues with Porter Martone are the same as with Corey Perry. Decision-making, kind of using pace in more intelligent ways, manipulating your speed. And manipulating your speed in order to be better. Because I think that Porter Martone does have a second gear. Like, he's able to. He does. Yeah. He just doesn't really use it intelligently, right?
And it's not a game-changing separate gear, right? Like in terms of power forwards that we've seen in recent years, this isn't a player who Josh Anderson can just, obviously Martone is a far better player in prospect than Josh Anderson ever was. But in terms of how he leverages speed in transition, that's not really how Martone operates. It's a lot more like Corey Perry, where he likes to have the puck on his stick for longer, switch gears as well, allow his teammates to catch up with him. He's not going to overextend plays like guys like Josh Anderson do, but he also lacks that end of top gear.
Yeah, absolutely. And overall, just, the comparable as a really good, really crafty, but really annoying, really pesky kind of power forward. It's
people are going to hate playing against him in the NHL.
Exactly. He's going to be one of the most despicable players in the NHL. And that means that everyone who doesn't have him in their prospect pool, every team, every fan that doesn't have him in the organization is not going to like him. I'm telling you right now, that's just what Porter Martone is.
And he's a draft eligible captain.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the rare ones in every draft year there. So very, very interesting profile there with Martone. And I can definitely understand a team going for him at second or third overall.
Yeah.
I think there's a conversation between Misa and Martone in terms of what you prefer. I prefer Michael Misa personally.
Me too.
He's just more consistent, doesn't make you want to pull your hair out with some of his decisions, doesn't turn pucks over almost ever.
Plays
You know,
center.
yeah, and he's a center. So there's a lot more to like for me with Michael Misa, but I can understand a team looking at Porter Martone's 6'2", 200-pound frame and the annoyingness that he plays with and the hard skills that he has and the soft skill and just go, we can't pass on this guy. He's a very, very interesting prospect. But that's our first segment done. We'll get into our second segment here where we talk about Cameron Schmidt, Anton Frondell, and Victor Eklund in just a second. But just before, a quick word from our sponsors at Indeed. We're driven by the search for better here at Locked On. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match instead with Indeed. If you need to hire, Indeed is the best place to do it. It is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. You can dish the busy work and you can use Indeed for everything. Scheduling, screening, and messaging all in one place so you can connect with candidates a lot faster. And it doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. What I like about Indeed personally, I got my job as an employee through Indeed. It was really easy, really straightforward, no surprises. You know exactly what the company expects from you, what the salary range is, all that good stuff, so you can make the best decision for your career. I can only imagine how much easier that makes it for employers who have to deal with multiple applications at one time for one spot. Makes it really, really easy to sift through the mess and know exactly what the candidate is offering you. So right now, listeners to the show can get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. You just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now. And you can support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply, but if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Alrighty, so let's get into our second segment here where we talk about Cameron Schmidt, Anton Frondell, and Victor Eklund. Now, we got two Swedes in here, but we'll start with the Canadian 5'8", 156-pound wrecking ball of a forward in Cameron Schmidt. He's an absolutely amazing player. Some of the best skating in this whole draft class, on top of a high-end shot. Possibly. On top of having a high-end shot, great handling skill, flashes of playmaking skill, and incredible physicality for a player his size. Now, I think when I talk about that exact profile, I can't help but think of Logan Stankoven. That's just such an easy, for me, comparable. But there's another player in the mix here that we can kind of hybridize with Stankoven to get Cameron Schmidt, and that's Cole Caufield. Do you want to expand on that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that like both of these are also very optimistic with the player. Like this is a player that we really, really do like a lot. And he brings a lot of different facets to the game. Like, as you mentioned, there is that intensity. There is that small area, like cycle game that Logan Stankoven thrives off of. But in terms of the Cole Caufield comp, I mean, of course, in terms of a 5'8", highly dynamic, goal-scoring forward, projected to go, well, possibly top 15, top 10 range, which was also the range for Cole Caufield by the end of the year after he'd broken all the records and rose up boards. I think that there's definitely a link to be made here. The way they score their goals is certainly different, but their ability to leverage their combination of intelligence and like game-breaking skill to create offense in a really projectable NHL way is reminiscent of Cole Caufield. I think that Schmidt is definitely a player that is going to score more of his goals from in tight than Cole Caufield, score more goals from like 6 feet around the net than Caufield does, and whose like medium to long range shooting isn't quite as potent as Caufield's was in his draft year. But again, a 5'8", 152-pound right shot right winger. This is a profile that we've definitely seen before with both Stankoven and Caufield. And from what we've seen so far this season, through 11 games with 12 goals and 19 points with the Vancouver Giants in the dub, Cam Schmidt has been fantastic and one of the 2 or 3 most dynamic players in the entire CHL to start the year. Like it's been him, Martone, and Misa basically in terms of game-breaking ability among draft eligibles. And obviously you have some other guys that we're going to talk about later on this week, like Liam Greentree, who has like 23 points through 9 games. But Schmidt has been on fire, and has looked the part of a top 10 selection so far.
For sure. We're going to expand a bit more on Schmidt versus Stankoven in tomorrow's episode, because it's one of the subjects of our Ringside Roundup episode, which comes out every week. So stick around for that for tomorrow, so we can expand on that a little. But I just want to say the progression with Stankoven from kind of speedy goal scorer to playmaker, I think that Schmidt is going to have to go through the same thing, and I think he has all the tools in order to get that done. But let's move on to Anton Frondell here, who's ranked significantly lower on our rankings at EP compared to other outlets there. And we've already explained why that is. We have kind of questions about the overall upside. But the comparables that we have right now are Dalibor, Dvorsky, and Gauthier. And a blend of those two is kind of where we sit there. With Dvorsky, you have the physical skill that's very comparable to Anton Frondell. About the same frame, is kind of a 6 foot, 200-pound center/forward who can kind of work the boards, protect pucks, all that stuff. Frondell can definitely do that, and we mentioned this in the EP rankings meeting. But I don't think there's any concern about Frondell not making the NHL. I think the issue is I don't think he has top line upside, which is where Gauthier comes in, because I think that Dvorsky doesn't necessarily have the level of finesse that Frondell shows at times. Like, he's got really nifty hands and tight. He can wriggle out of pressure really well. He's got a good shot. That sounds a lot more like Gauthier, right?
It does, and I think like both of these players have aspects that Frondell has, and I mean both of those guys were top 10 picks. So us having him, having Frondell at 15 at EP is definitely low, even regarding these comparables. But of course, it's an October ranking. We'll see how things develop this season, and he was still injured by the time that we met up for our ranking meeting. But yeah, as you mentioned, like with Gauthier, there's a lot of finesse, just like there is with Frondell. But it's, I think, with the Dvorsky comp where I see a lot clearer links apart from the handling ability in tight in the offensive zone. Yeah, that combination of high degree of intelligence with those physical tools, with that defensive motor, but also defensive intelligence and refinement. I mean, Dvorsky played good pro minutes his entire draft year in Hockey Allsvenskan, and I could see Frondell also playing a good role for Djurgården this season. So yeah, I'm curious to see how they develop, and especially also seeing how Frondell develops this season as a teammate of the next guy we're talking about here, our other top Swedish prospect in this draft class, and Victor Eklund, the brother of William Eklund. And wouldn't you know it, that's our player comp, is William Eklund and Victor Eklund. And these are both players that are highly dynamic, very creative, but they definitely still have some differences. So talk me through how Victor and William differ in their physical engagement, physical proficiency, and ability to leverage their skill in the offensive zone.
For sure. So I'd say Victor Eklund is about the same level of skill as William Eklund across the board. Great shooter, great passer, great playmaker. They're pretty much on the same level in terms of handling skill as well. I think where they differ mostly is, like you mentioned, is the physical differences. With Eklund, he's a bit more physically competent, but with Victor Eklund, you've got a more violent player. That's kind of the difference there. And it's really interesting because Victor Eklund is starting to show some flashes of really good puck protection, really good board battle mechanics. So on top of being more aggressive, more violent than William, he's also developing the competency aspect of his game. And that's kind of bringing his game to a new level in the Allsvenskan right now. He's got 7 points in 10 games so far in the Allsvenskan with Djurgården. He's outproducing Anton Frondell. And that's, it's part of the reason why we like Victor Eklund more than Anton Frondell so far. But it's also the fact that I also added for Victor Eklund the comparable of Logan Cooley. And the only reason I'm adding this is because of the difference between Logan Cooley and Gauthier versus the difference between Victor Eklund and Anton Frondell. It's a very similar kind of way that they play off each other, those two pairs of players. And obviously Logan Cooley went ahead of Gauthier. Cooley was probably going to be the top end guy regardless. And heading into this year, between those two, Anton Frondell is obviously being talked about more. He's being conversed about more, and it's the guy that seems to be on top. But Victor Eklund is really, really interesting. He's transitionally dominant, incredible hands, really, really intelligent. His processing of the game is really high end, and it reminds me a lot of why I was such a big fan of William Eklund in his draft year. I had him top 2 pretty much the whole year.
I think I did too. I think William was actually number 1 on my board.
Yeah, it was the Matty Beniers year
Yeah.
when he went first overall. Well, no, Matty Beniers and Owen Power.
Yeah.
Those were the top 2. My top 2 was William Eklund and Luke Hughes, and so far those 2 have been looking really, really good. Even though Matty Beniers and Owen Power are great prospects, I think that Eklund and Hughes have a bit more upside long term. That's where I stand on Victor Eklund. Frondell is a definite NHLer. He's going to be in the NHL. There's no doubt about it. But I think if Victor Eklund develops properly, he's a full-on top-line forward, like we're seeing from William Eklund this year. So,
and even with Victor Eklund, we saw that last season as well. This isn't just like a hot start to a season with 7 points in 10 professional games. He was playing pro hockey in Hockeyallsvenskan last season already, and every single time I tuned in to watch Linus Eriksson against pro competition, it was Victor Eklund that was standing out in my viewings. And I watched a lot of Linus Eriksson last year. And in the playoffs for Djurgården last season, Victor Eklund already had 2 goals and 6 points through 15 games as a D-1 playing pro hockey. So he's been creating offense already at a high degree, and that's only taking off more this season.
Yeah, as a 5'10.5" D-1 playing pro
spark
hockey.
plug. He's a spark plug. I love him.
Very interesting player. But that's our second segment done. We'll go into our third segment here where we talk about our region's prospects. We'll talk about Will Moore, Caleb Desnoyers, and Nathan Quinn in just a second. But just before, a quick word from our sponsors at FanDuel.
Hey NFL fans, you can start the season off big with a massive return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And you can take that swing on whatever sport that interests you the most, whether it be American football or European football. We have the second Champions League match day starting off tomorrow, which is going to be very exciting. And beyond that, maybe you're not a football fan in any degree and you prefer tennis or golf, or of course, if you're listening to this podcast, hockey may very well be your sport of choice. Whatever floats your boat, FanDuel has something to interest every kind of sports fan. That is at FanDuel.com.
Alrighty, so let's move on to our final segment here and review our region's top prospects and give them comparables. And we'll start off with Will Moore from the USNTDP. Probably at this point, one of the kind of marquee standouts from the NTDP in terms of, prospects that are going to get drafted in the first round. I'd be very surprised if Moore's not a first rounder unless his season goes really poorly. But there are still concerns with Moore's game overall. So talk me through first a play style with Will Moore and then kind of tie that into our comparables here for this prospect.
Yeah, so Will Moore is a 6'2", 161-pound left shot center. He's also been playing the wing a decent amount. I wouldn't be really positive that he's going to end up as a center in the NHL because this is a player who is fairly inconsistent but has a high degree of tools in his toolkit. He's an above average skater, really good puck handler, creative playmaker in the offensive zone. But he often stops moving his feet and just kind of glides around the ice and isn't overly engaged. And it's in those sequences where things really break down for him. So there's still a lot of work that has to be done in his game for him to really live up to that first round or top 15 type of valuation that we've been seeing a lot in recent months with this player. But the tools are fantastic and have a lot of shades of Michael Hage in them. The way he skates, the way he attacks off the rush, even his inconsistencies to start the season, we saw with Hage last year as well in Chicago. It wasn't really a hot start for Hage by any stretch of the imagination. The decision-making wasn't overly refined to start off the year. And it's been the same thing with Will Moore this year. I will say I have more concerns with Moore at the same stage in their development. Like with Hage, there's obviously a lot of other circumstances that were contributing to inconsistent on-ice play that don't even have to be mentioned here. Whereas with Will Moore, I think a lot of it also just goes down to not having added an extra gear since his GTHL days. He still approaches the game in a bit of a GTHL Junior A style, and I have some concerns around that, but a player that, if he's able to kick into gear, has game-breaking potential. And the NTDP is starving for star power this season. They need a player to step up and take the reins offensively. And in terms of tools, there's no player that screams that profile more than Will Moore. So Michael Hage is one of our comparables. And the other one, we actually went into the NHL in terms of a highly skilled, really mobile, dynamic offensive piece that just hasn't quite been able to put it all together. So we're going with Andreas Athanasiou there. So Will Moore is also a guy that has a lot of these flashes of offense, but there's definitely a possibility that he ends up as a highly skilled third line guy rather than like your slam dunk top sixer. So I'm very curious to see how his development continues. But what's been your impression with Will Moore and regarding to our two comps here?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at a similar prospect in terms of just controlling play off his stick, but kind of still learning how to use pace, how to use changes of speed. Doesn't really kind of move his feet all that much. I haven't been very impressed with Will Moore, so I don't want to kind of, crap on a young kid too early here. He's still got a lot of runway left. But there's two prospects here in the QMJHL that we need to address as well. First and foremost, Caleb Desnoyers has been very interesting since his return from injury over the past week or so. He came back on the 14th, so I think that was exactly last week. Played really well. Then the next game, scored 5 points against the St. John Sea Dogs and looked absolutely phenomenal. So the comparables for me there, in terms of play style, we're talking about a very aggressive forechecker, an in-your-face kind of screw-you type of forechecker who will push you into the boards, who will win the puck, and will do something with it. On top of having great defensive acumen, a high-end brain. I think is one of the, if not the smartest prospect in this draft class. Really intelligent processing and reading of the game. On top of some really interesting finesse skills. He can move the puck laterally. He's got great hands. Just go and watch his goal against St. John, the first one, just to see his transition skill in action. Great playmaking. I think his shot overall needs some work. It's not the best of his toolkit, but the handling and playmaking skill make up for it so far. For me, the comparables, you're looking at a Sam Bennett in terms of the way he approaches the forecheck, but you're looking at a Sean Monahan in terms of how he approaches the offensive game. Really meticulous, smart, kind of cerebral, but once he loses the puck, he is the meanest prospect you'll ever see. He's very, very interesting. And he also has some shades of Jonathan Toews in the way that he balances those two things at times. It's not consistent. He's not there all the time, but in his best games, he reminds me of Jonathan Toews in his approach. The only difference between the two is Toews had a very high-end skating stride to complement all of that. Desnoyers' main issue, I would say, is skating. He doesn't have the high-end second gear in order to blow past players. He doesn't have the high-end second gear to deke through them and maintain that pace through those dekes. But the way that they approach the game offensively and defensively is pretty similar. So that's kind of the range of what Desnoyers could end up. He could end up being a Sam Bennett, kind of start off as a third liner and kind of work his way up a lineup. It can be a Sean Monahan, which is a very consistent second liner throughout his career with maybe a dip or two, or it can end up being kind of a lesser version of Jonathan Toews. I think that's his upside. That's really the best that he could be, is kind of 1A, 1B type of center. But there's a lot to work with here with Caleb Desnoyers. And finally, a prospect we both like a lot and see an easy comparable with, Nathan Quinn out of the Quebec Compound. He's a 5'10 center, played on the top line to start the year. He's now on the second line in Quebec, and he's basically Owen Beck, right?
He is. There's one clear difference, just as with your Desnoyers and Toews comparison. That's skating. Owen Beck is like an absolute speedster. Skating is one of the strongest tools in his arsenal, which is not the case for Nathan Quinn. Quinn's probably, a 4.5 or 5 grade skater by EP's ranking tool, so just about an average projection on that front. But he's been fantastic. As one of the youngest players in this draft class, is in August 29th, 07 birthday, and at 5'11", 161 as a right shot centerman. He has a lot of runway in his development, and he's scored already 4 goals and 15 points through 13 games and developed a great chemistry with Stankoven, a fantastic sniper at the QMJHL level, and it's been like really dynamic with Quebec. The last 5 games been a bit rougher as they're on a long losing streak, and also had 2 shutouts on that run, but Nathan Quinn's been really, really good. He's a dogged forechecker, really intelligent in the offensive zone, very efficient with his routes. And yeah, overall an intelligent two-way center that is probably going to be an NHLer in some capacity, whether that's going to be in a like pure bottom six role or maybe even like a really solid middle six capacity remains to be seen. But he's a guy that I think both of us see at least some first round flashes of so far this season.
For sure. And that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode and what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rating review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our future shows as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of October. And make sure to tune in for Rinkside Roundup tomorrow. This has been Hadi Kalakesh with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.